Hey everybody, it's Jackie once again from Myra Stitch and Post, coming to you from my home sewing studio. And I'm here to introduce to you the second step. And I'm hoping that by now everyone has had an opportunity to check out the YouTube video, or we also have a Facebook group that we've created, and you will find the supply list for the Sew Mysterious Mystery Quilt on our Facebook, on our YouTube. And subsequent videos will be posted to those sites, as well as any other documentation. So I'm assuming you've all got everything cut out, and now we're going to start piecing our 9-patch square. Okay, so I have laid out here on my table my 9-patch fabric, so you can see my background fabrics and one of my nice floral prints. Now, because I'm using fat quarters, my strips are not full width of fabric. So what I did is I took my background fabrics and I cut them in half as well so that the lengths match. And I had 10 fat quarters, so I'm actually going to have a little bit more fabric than what I need, but having more is better than not having enough. So what I have done is I have laid out my strip sets here. This will be my center, this will be one of my outers, and this will be the other outer. So what I'd like to do now is invite you over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to get the sewing machine set up, and we're going to start piecing our strip sets together. All right, so I'll be right back at you when I get set up at my machine. All right, so I'm all set up here at my beautiful Epic 980Q sewing machine, and what I'd like to do is cover off just your sewing machine setup. So I have on my machine a 1/4 inch piecing foot with the guide, and actually it's called a scant 1/4 inch piecing foot. It's got a slightly wider opening, which allows me to move my needle over. So I'm going to snap that on. I'm going to go into my menu. I have a quilting stitch menu, my 1/4 inch setting. Now, one of the things that I recommend all of my students do is shorten your stitch length to 2. Your default is generally 2.5. This allows for 2 things. One, that when you're pressing, you don't see your stitches. And secondly, when you cut things apart, they will not come undone. Alrighty? And then I'm going to move my needle over 2 additional spaces. So the default setting on this machine was 2.5. I've moved it over to 2.8 because I like a scant 1/4 inch. All right, let's get started. So when I'm piecing strip sets, I very seldom actually pin anything together. So I have my strip set and I have my background fabric and my beautiful print. Now when you get ready to start sewing, it's so important to make sure that your raw edges are flush with one another. So I'm simply going to place my strip set underneath my sewing machine. I like to set my machine so that needle stops in the down position, and we're going to sew. And as I'm sewing, I'm just making sure that my strip set stays together so that the raw edges are even. And I'm going to sew all the way through. Okay, once I got through this, we're going to go and meet at the ironing station so that I can show you the proper technique for ironing. All right, so I have finished sewing together my first 2 strips of my center of my 9-patch block. You can see that I have the black floral print on top and my background on the back. And if you look very closely, there are no peekers. In other words, I kept my raw edges nice and flush. So now what I'd like to do is just give you a quick little tutorial on the proper pressing techniques. I want my seams to lie towards the black fabric. So with the black fabric on top, I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to set it down on top of that seam that I just sewed. That is going to set the seam. In other words, it's going to put those fibers from my thread into my fabric. Now, if I take the fabric that's on top and I sweep my iron over top, just like this, I like to use a shot of steam. And now I have my 2 strips pressed. So when I am sewing, I always sew a seam, press a seam. All right, so I like to sew a seam and press a seam. That way, you're not going to get any seams that are going to flip over. Much easier to manage your strip sets if you sew a seam, press a seam. Sew a seam, press a seam. And if you sew and press, you will be so impressed with your finished product. All right, I'm going to go back to my sewing machine now, and I'm going to add the other background strip to this center piece. All right, I've finished sewing my strip sets together for my 9-patch. And through the magic of video, I want to just one more time reiterate how important it is. Sew a seam, press a seam, sew a seam, press a seam. And I want to just one more time show you how I like to press. So I've always found if you can't cut straight, sew straight, you haven't got a hope in heck in being successful at having your quilt come together properly. But the last little piece of that puzzle is really pressing. And I see so many people always pressing on the right side or the wrong side of their fabric like this because they can see what it is they're doing. But in effect, what they end up doing is pressing in pleats. So what I like to do, because my fabrics are all going to have the seam going towards the dark fabric, I have that dark fabric on top, set my seam, a little shot of steam, and then sweep the iron over top. Sweep the iron over top. And if you do that, guys, if there's any guys participating, you are going to be successful every time. All right, I'm going to finish pressing off my strip sets, and then we're going to get ready to start cutting these strips into the pieces that we need to sew our 9-patch together. All right, I've got all my pressing done, and I have cheated a little bit because I have a lot of this work already done. But I want to show you just how quickly things can be done if you learn some of the special tricks that we're going to uncover here. So I have my 2 outer strip sets, and I have an inner strip set. So I'm just going to put one on top of the other, just like that, and put that one down there just like that as well. Okay, so I'm ready to start subcutting. First off, these strip sets should measure 5 inches. So our unfinished block is 5 inches. And these strips were all cut 2 inches when we started. And we are going to do some 2-inch subcuts. So what I have to do is square up, and I've got all 3 of my strips layered on top of one another. Square that up. I'm going to very, very carefully rotate that as to make sure that nothing gets disturbed. And now I'm going to show you that power cutting trick that I showed you when we were cutting out our strip sets. Now that I have my squared up edge to my left-hand side, again because I am a right-handed cutter, I am going to take my ruler and I need to cut these apart in 2-inch segments. So I am going to put my ruler down here at the 20-inch mark, and I'm going to do a cut. And then just like the power cutting that we did on our strip sets, I'm going to back my ruler off 2 inches every cut. 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. Now that I have my subcuts done, you can see now how our subcuts are going to form our 4-patch block, or 9-patch block, sorry. So I am going to start at the machine, and I'm going to sew my inner to my outer, press, and then I'm going to do my outer to my combination that I previously stitched. So let's go to the sewing machine and I'll show you one more time my sewing technique. Okay, here I am back at my sewing machine, and I have my inner and outer pieces, and I'm going to simply line up my seams so that they nest into one another. And because all of your pressing should have been done so that the seams went towards the dark side, they should automatically nest into one another. When you do that and you just run your fingertips over them, you can feel them nice and flat tucked into one another. And this does two things. As you're sewing, it's going to help nest them together, as well as you're going to have perfectly pieced 9-patch blocks. So back over to my sewing machine again, shorten stitch length to 2 and scant 1/4 inch, and I am going to start sewing. And you can tell, see, I did not use pins. I very seldom do use pins unless it's very imperative. And in this case here, doing a 9-patch, it's not that important. But please use the technique that you feel most comfortable with. If you feel pinning is the way you like to get control, then go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm going to continue on and come back and show you some of my completed 9-patch blocks when we're all said and done. All right, so I have the first 2 segments of my 9-patch sewn together. As you can see, here are my outer strip segment, inner segment, and over on my sewing machine I have the other side of this. So for pressing, we are basically going to press the seam so that it lays towards the outer segment. And again, with the new pressing technique that I've shared with everybody, make sure that outer segment is face up. Set your seam, and then smooth your iron over. Smooth your iron over. And again, sew a seam, press a seam. Sew a seam, press a seam. All right, I'm going to finish up doing this little task, and then we'll get the other side joined on. I'll meet you back here in just a minute. Alrighty, I have finished constructing my 9-patch blocks, and I am just once again pressing. So I have the outer segment on the top, and I'm just setting my seam, and then I'm sweeping my iron, giving it a little shot of steam. I love working with steam. It makes your blocks so nice and flat. Get them all completed. So I think in one of my earlier videos I may have mentioned that I was working on a queen size, but after reviewing the fabric that I have at home, I only have enough to do the twin. So the twin it is. I will need 59 9-patch blocks for my twin size quilt. So I've already got 6, and as you can see that I've already got a lot of my 9-patch blocks sewn together. So your homework is, gals, to go get your 9-patch blocks all constructed and pressed and set aside. And when we meet again, we will start working on our alternating blocks. Those are the Y blocks and your Z blocks. Hope you're enjoying our little Sew Mysterious Mystery Quilt. This is Jackie from the Myra Stitchin' Post.